Welcome to another episode of the Mapscaping podcast. My name is Daniel, and this is a podcast for the geospatial community. My guest on the show today is Ryan Shields, and Ryan, in my mind, is one of the most interesting people in geospatial. He's touched so many different parts of the industry, from remote sensing work in conservation to tourism mapping at a startup, to data engineering and data science on disaster response projects for FEMA and state governments. And now he's taken all of that geography and data engineering background and applied it to a media startup, making internet videos that millions of people watch every month. And if you're familiar with Johnny Harris on YouTube, that's the channel Ryan's working on. What I really love about Ryan's work is that he is always connecting people to places, and it's always wrapped in a story. So today we're going to do something a little different. We're going through 10 tools that Ryan is using right now to tell map stories on the internet. And you've probably heard of some of them, but you definitely haven't heard of all of them. So you might want to listen carefully. Okay, let's get into it. Ryan, welcome to the podcast. I'm really pleased that you could join me today. We've worked on a few different projects together, and in my mind, you're one of the most interesting people in geospatial. You just seem to touch so many different parts of it, and you combine things in a really, really interesting way. So I'm really pleased that we finally get to do a podcast together. I don't know what your title is, but maybe you could put some more words around that. Could you just give us an understanding of your background? Who are you? Where do you come from? What are you doing now?
Thanks for having me on. And I appreciate the kind framing. Mostly, I think most people probably see what I've done as just being chaotic, but having it framed as interesting is nice for a change. But I guess I should probably practice what I preach. And instead of giving my job title, I'll talk more about the problems that I solve than what the title is supposed to be. At the root of everything that I've done in my career, it's been connecting people to places. And that might sound kind of generic and whatever, but it's taken a lot of different forms. I started out in sort of the conservation space doing remote sensing. And so in that framework, it was working with scientists in these local communities in the Caribbean to connect them to their local ecosystems and building these tools for resilience initiatives there. Then I went on and worked for a startup that did tourism mapping. So we were trying to connect tourists to the different places they were visiting through maps. Then I went on and worked as a data engineer and a data scientist, working on disaster response projects with FEMA and state governments here in the US. So with that, we were, again, trying to connect stakeholders to these places that they were trying to manage these disasters in. And now I have taken all of that data engineering and geography background, and now I work for a media startup making internet videos that millions of people watch every month. If people are familiar with Johnny Harris's work, that's the channel that I work on. The broader company that they've started is called New Press, and it's sort of an experiment in what independent, creator-led, community-led journalism can look like in the modern age of media. And so that turns into YouTube videos. And so my role there covers lots of different things. Some of it's reporting and researching these things and writing scripts, but also there's still this data engineering component where I'm pulling spatial data, and instead of dropping it into these front-end interfaces, my new front-end engineers are the animators. And so we're converting spatial data into animation assets to really make these beautiful graphics to explain these stories that, again, connect people to places and events and all these fun geopolitical things. So that's why I say connecting people to places has been that arc. It's taken lots of different forms, and I've covered everything from the open source stack to proprietary stuff. But at the end of the day, that's what I care about, is the people and the stories underneath the pixels. And where I'm at right now, that's a very literal thing in that we are telling stories about those places. So that's my very long-winded answer, but yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Well, there was a lot to cover there, so I appreciate it. And I stand by my original statement. You are one of the most interesting people I know in geospatial, simply because you've touched so many different things. When you work on something, there's always a twist to it. You're never just building a pipeline for the sake of building a pipeline. There's this, you manage to sort of put the story around it. I find it fascinating. And now, of course, you're making internet videos. I think you're selling yourself a little bit short there, but let's leave it at that. A lot of those are being published, consumed on YouTube. So what we planned on doing today was introduce people to some of the tools that you're using, mentioning YouTube in the best YouTube way. We've got 10 tools. And I can see the title for me now, like in front of me now. 10 tools that Ryan Shields is using today. You should use them too. Number 7 will surprise you. And we're going to start at the top, number 10, and sort of work our way down to your favorite tool. So, Ryan Shields, most interesting person I know in geospatial. What is your number 10 tool?
Number 10 is one that I started using almost immediately when it first came out, and that is Felt. And the reason I love Felt is, one, the collaborative nature of it. So we've used it on a couple stories so far. One of the most prominent ones was a video that we did about Swiss trains. And the premise of that video is that Johnny went to Switzerland and used the Swiss rail system for many days in a row to try and understand how it works, because it's this big, beautiful engineering feat that's been built over decades, and it's notoriously just very efficient. And so he wanted to understand how trains fit in the Swiss identity. And so a big part of that story was this challenge where he tries to visit all 26 Swiss cantons using only the train system in under 24 hours. And so what we did was, before he left, was we planned out his whole route in Felt. And it was just so easy to deploy because we could build it. He could open it up on his phone and then just hit a button and could see his GPS dot tracking through there. So if you go back and watch through the video, there's actually lots of cameos where you'll see him looking at Felt or see a screen recording of what we're doing there. And so that collaborative thing was just super fun. It really delivered on its promise of being able to, me as a technical person working with the non-technical folks and using it in this creative way. And then we've used it lots of other ways too. Like, it's really handy for just being able to drag in and view data quickly, filter it quickly. There's lots of things that can be done super fast with it. I think that what Sam and the crew at Felt have done, they've delivered on their promise of making it really kind of joyful to use. And I enjoy that. It's a bit expensive, I will admit that. And we could talk about that another time. But I do like Felt. It's my number 10.
Cool. Just a few things to add. So I don't know if you've played around with it, but Felt also has a plugin to QGIS.
I have, yeah.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about your experience with that.
So I actually made a video about that plugin back when it first came out. I don't know if I still have it up online or not, but Felt was hiring someone to work on videos. And so this was like a job interview thing where I made this video about the Felt plugin and how it would like upgrade your raster workflows and stuff. And I'm sure it was quite a clunky video, but it was really cool because I remember just being able to open it up in QGIS and push the data straight to the map that way. I haven't used it as much, admittedly, since then, because the upload anything feature is so good, and because I can do so much more of the data manipulation and processing in there. Like, I can clip my vector data and buffer it and filter it and all that stuff. I don't have to do as much locally. And then if I'm processing rasters, most of the time I'll do that in like GDAL or something. And so I don't open QGIS as much for the things that I would just be dragging and dropping data into. I haven't used it as much since then. But have you used it?
Not recently, no.
Yeah.
So I can't comment on. I'm sure it's constantly changing, as the Felt platform is constantly changing as well. They, at the start anyway, I haven't kept up to date with it, but they were shipping so much functionality at the start so quickly. It was incredible. And it's worth touching on that upload anything, where you literally can just drag anything onto it and it works. It uploads it, it geocodes it, it does the works. You don't have to decide if it's a raster or what kind of vector data it is or what projection it's in. Felt just does it. It's incredible.
Yeah, I really fell in love with that feature. Like, that was one of the first things. And like I said, being able to hand data to someone who is non-technical and just be able to say, hey, just drop this layer in and you can build your own thing. Because sometimes Johnny will use our Felt subscription to do pre-planning for a trip. Like, it may not be the same type of adventure thing, but it's like, well, I want to kind of explore the place. And so for him to just be able to grab, like, put some data together in Google Earth, export a KML, and then not have to worry about whether or not that's going to import or have to convert it to anything, and then be able to drag in the CSV he just found in like a research paper. That is one of the most valuable parts about it, I think, on top of all the other great dashboardy AI stuff they've wrapped in as part of their enterprise thing now. Those core features from the beginning are the things I love. So.
Yeah, get the data on the map as quick as possible. I get it. But I remember when I was talking to Sam about that in a podcast a couple of years ago, That was a really difficult thing for them to build, but that was one of the things they focused on straight away. It was like, how can we get people to put the data on the map as quickly as possible with as little friction as possible?
Yeah, I can only imagine how tough it was. I think I remember listening to maybe Max's interview with Can Durek, and he was talking about how like their geocoding engine was using an LLM behind the scenes to like evaluate the column. And so, I'd love to know the nuts and bolts of it because yeah, it's a wildly complex sort of decision tree, decision graph, whatever. And I love that it works. I've found very few hiccups with it.
So that was felt at number 10.
Yep.
Number 9 is?
Number 9 is PostGIS or PostGIS, but specifically within Crunchy Bridge because it is the easiest way I have found to set up PostGIS. Now, I will caveat that with the Mac app. So if you just go to like the Apple store, you can download the PostGIS app, and that is like the easiest way to get it set up locally. There's like tons of good Docker container things out there that you can spin it up with. But to get it like up and running in a managed cloud instance for not that much money, I love Crunchy Bridge. And I love that every time I go back on their screen, this is like the one time I'm okay with like my privacy kind of being invaded. When I go back to the login screen on Crunchy Bridge, it has a little pop-up that says, this is what you used to log in last time, like your GitHub SSO or your email. So I don't have to remember what it was or like which account it was. I just know, okay, boom, click on GitHub, I sign in, or I click on Google and sign in. I don't know. It's just delightful. Like I know that there's lots of technical things happening because I've deployed Postgres in like Google Cloud, in like the Google Cloud ecosystem, and that was fine. But it was kind of harder. It got expensive faster, and for like $50 a month, I have this managed PostGIS instance, and it's really easy to connect to. And like a lot of it, the management of it is really seamless, and the setup is great, and I love it. So that is my go-to for when I need to run PostGIS in the cloud now.
How do you connect to it? How do you get data into it and out of it?
I wire it up to QGIS and dbeaver. So when you set it up, it just has a dashboard on the web page, and there's just a connection tab that says, hey, here's a drop down that shows you all the different user roles that you have in there. So you'll have your super user. There's one for applications that will have like more scoped permissions. And then, of course, you can set up your own users. And also, when you click on those, it gives you an option of like, hey, do you want your connection credentials as like a URL string, as a YAML file? So it kind of flexes to how you're going to be using it. Like, I don't really want to parse a connection string when I'm trying to just enter the credentials into QGIS or into dbeaver to connect to it that way. So I want the YAML or like just the JSON version that says, here's your password, here's your host, here's that. But when I am using it in like a Python library and I want to just plug that connection string directly into my environment, my env file, I can just drop it in there and then it'll read into my thing. So it makes it easy that way. So I use dbeaver a lot if I'm doing stuff on like the tabular side of like, I just need to upload a CSV really quick that matches it. Or you can connect, like I said, you can connect to it in Python and use the normal Postgres Python libraries for doing inserts that way. And then QGIS, because I don't know if a lot of people realize QGIS was built as a client for PostGIS. And that's like one of the things I love using it for is just connecting to my Postgres instance. I can upload data there for the spatial side of things. I can do all the data entry, view stuff. Yeah, it's great.
Do you pay per read, per write? Do you pay per gigabyte stored?
They might have it broken down a little bit. I know that the instance that I'm running right now is pretty consistently about $50 a month. It's based on like a storage tier. The other thing I loved was that a lot of places don't like to have hobby tiers because you don't want to make a business out of hobbyists, but they do have a hobby tier. And so you can kind of set up like this light, like half a gig of storage type of thing. And you don't have to have like big memory, but then you can upgrade it if you want. So from what I remember setting it up, they give you options to select like whether or not you want to deploy on AWS or GCP or Azure. So you never have to like log into to those cloud environments, but you are controlling what it's on if you have certain enterprise system requirements that it be on one or the other. And so I remember the prices differed a little bit between those, like maybe, I can't remember who was more expensive, but some of them varied in price. And then it was just kind of the price went up as you added more storage and as you added more memory. And there might be some read-write things that, like some quotas that you might have to pay per read if you exceed. I don't remember. Because it's just me kind of collaborating with a small team and like serving like an occasional web app there. We're not doing huge amounts of requests out of it or anything like that. So I haven't tortured it too hard to see if I get into trouble with running up a bill that way. But in terms of just like having it that I can access anywhere, switching between machines, it's really nice.
Okay, so far we've got Felt, we've got PostGIS, Crunchy Bridge.
Yep.
What's the next one?
Number 8 is Geo Layers 3. And I would venture there are probably a lot of people that haven't heard of this one. If they have, it's probably because of Max or someone like Jason Boone. But it is a animation extension for Adobe After Effects that is specifically built for mapping. And the thing that I love about it is that it's really clever. It's using all of the web mapping, like all the Slippy map infrastructure that was built, and just converting it into After Effects language. So there's a bit of a learning curve to it, and I still don't know it that well. The extent of it that I know is enough to open it up and set up a canvas, and then I will import data and sort of time it out, especially for like historical borders. Like if I'm trying to fact check, like make sure that the historical borders are factual for an animation sequence, I'll take like the voiceover, I'll say, okay, when we say this word, we switch to this GeoJSON file, and I'll lay it out. Anyway, that's the extent of what I know. I don't know all the fancy SFX features our animators really make it shine. But it's just super cool how under the hood, it's using things like MapTiler, Slippy map based maps, and you sort of set your zoom extents. And then when you import it, it just kind of chunks all these tiles in to your After Effects timeline as After Effects objects, and you can just work with them. So it's almost like breaking it down it's taking the individual tiles from the zoom levels, bringing those in as local PNGs, rendering it in After Effects, converting your vector data into whatever the equivalent of that in After Effects is. It's like a shape layer, and I don't know what I know lots about different types of vector data. I don't know what this is, if it's just like an SVG, but it converts it into something that After Effects likes. And then you can apply all the delicious special effects styling that really makes the map shine. And that's what we do for a lot of the maps we make. And that's why it's limited to just working with the Mercator projection, is because it's using all the web mapping technology. So we've built a couple custom rigs where I will just generate a bunch of like strokes and fills from like Natural Earth or something in a custom projection. And we'll still do those in After Effects. It just loses the spatial awareness that you would otherwise preserve with Geo Layers 3. And so like if you add a country in from the Geo Layers interface, it's pulling it from like OpenStreetMap or from Natural Earth. So it's making all these core geospatial things that all of us love and have nerded out over, and making them accessible to these really talented animators like Jason Boone. If you're not familiar with it, go check out his work, because he is like the Geo Layers guy, and just they can make really cool stuff that a lot of us would aspire to in telling map stories. Anyway, it's just a really cool project, and just clever how they're taking something that was intended for one thing and repurposing it into this animation and special effects world.
Yeah, if we're talking about telling stories, Jason Boone is incredible. And I've only seen a little bit of the work that he's done, but I know that he works with Geo Layers a lot. I know he's got a bunch of tutorials about it as well. And he's incredible. Like, he is an incredible storyteller, and he really brings data to life in a whole nother way that you just can't do that with a PDF.
Yeah, I was really excited when I saw that he ended up going to work for Felt for a while. I think he might still be there, actually. I don't know. And he was making a lot of their YouTube content. So when he started diving into the more technical side of the geospatial world, and knowing that he had this already really deep special effects and After Effects and Geo Layers background, I just got really excited about that, because I knew that meant that level of animation quality was going to bleed into our community, and people would start to pick up on what this really high quality level of storytelling could do, and just something different than ArcGIS animations. Nothing against like the animation stuff in ArcGIS Pro, but if you ever watch one of the like 3D fly-throughs that like drone POVs people do in ArcGIS Pro, they're just not good because like every time you want to move the camera, you set what's called a keyframe, and that just says, okay, at this point, the camera is going to tilt on the XYZ axis. Like it's going to look this way, it's going to move here, and it's just transitioning between keyframes. In something like After Effects, you have really, really granular control over how those camera movements slow down and transition into one another. And there's a little bit of that in ArcGIS Pro, but you can just feel the choppiness when it's going through. And the 3D stuff like doesn't, it almost renders on the fly. So you're seeing tiles change as you're flying through it, and it's just kind of clunky. Anyway, all that is to say, I was really excited when Boone was kind of bleeding over into our community and showing this other tool that a lot of us would not have encountered otherwise.
I think that kind of work is inspirational. And I see people like Jason Boone is growing the pie as opposed to fighting over a small chunk of it. What is your 7th favorite tool?
Number 7 is CShapes. And I don't know, I think of data as tools, and CShapes is technically a data set, but I use it like a tool because it's just something that I come back to over and over again. If anyone's familiar with Natural Earth, the open source data set that kind of has country borders and rivers, and it's all designed to neatly cartographically line up, CShapes is sort of like that, but for historical data, for historical borders specifically, I should say. And it's an academic product. That's the other thing. So I love Open Historical Map. I use it a lot, and it has its own value that I'll get to in a minute. But with CShapes, it was this university in, I want to say Switzerland or Germany, university in Europe that has a really well-known kind of GIS and cartography footprint, went out and said, okay, we're going to look at all of the countries since like, I think it starts in like 1813 with like the Congress of Vienna, if I remember right. But basically, we're going to use that as like the baseline, and we're going to try and figure out like what treaties were in force at that time, and can we draw boundaries from that? And so they would go through and look at the treaties and try and figure out like, okay, what did the boundaries look like based on these treaties, and then turn that into a data set. And so anytime that something would change with the country, that shape has an end date. So it's kind of like a is valid from this to that. And then it becomes this next iteration, like maybe it gets absorbed or it doesn't. But basically, I can go through and filter to say, okay, we're telling this story about, I'll use World War II as an example because that's like a common one. Like we're telling the story about World War II, but there's a limitation that I'll get to. But I'm talking about this period from 1937 to 1946. I want to show all the borders at these different beats in the story. I can just grab those snapshots and again, load them into our Geo Layers software and use that. Now, the limitation of it is the borders get tricky during the middle of wars, right? Like the fronts are shifting. And so what it doesn't have is border changes that did not get finalized by a treaty. So if it's like in the middle of a war and the border sort of appears, like a country takes over a territory and then it backtracks, that is not there. So in the video that we did about Finland about this time last year, we talked about like the Winter War and all these different points where Finland was gaining and losing territory. And some of those were not captured because they were just part of the battle campaigns that were happening at that time. So in those cases, you would sometimes go to other maps and draw those borders yourselves, or go to Open Historical Map because they don't have that restriction. But the thing I love about it is that it's an academic data set that has like a methodology paper that you can kind of point to be like, I'm not just saying this is a border because I think it's a border. It's that here's this group of like historians who tried to make this data set, and there's some level of rigor behind it. And you have to kind of dig through Reddit feeds to figure out who's debating what. It has some shortcomings in that it chose to only do it by polygon. I think it would have been better to do it by lines because sometimes back in the day, they didn't say the border ends here. It was just like, here's these two lines that extend out in an infinite direction, and that's the border. Like, we don't care about the desert out there. And I think that has some utility. But anyway, overall, I love CShapes. I use it all the time. I come back to it over and over again like it's a tool. And I think it's a really underutilized data set that people would like.
That's really cool. I had no idea that existed. Have you seen Deep State Map
No, I haven't.
for the Ukraine conflict?
I don't think I have.
You should check it out. So deepstatemap.live, I think, is the URL. And so I was just listening to you talk, and I'm wondering if things like this deep state map for the Ukraine war are going to have an impact on what something like CShapes will look like in the future. Because you're just saying the borders weren't finalized during a conflict, or it was only after a treaty was signed. But in this deep state map, I mean, you can see it fluctuate and sort of pulse back and forth as the conflict changes.
Yeah, and this gets to a debate that's sort of at the heart of a lot of data sets, C-shapes included, natural earth included, and that is like what constitutes control, right? Like there are many data sets that show de facto control over de jure, and people will dispute that. And in some conflicts, that makes more sense than others. Like it's kind of more disputed or less disputed depending on where you're at. So I think this will absolutely impact things like open historical map. And I honestly wouldn't be surprised if it goes that far forward that stuff like this is already worked into it. And yeah, I think with C-shapes too, because we may never end up with a treaty per se, but we may end up with cemented control of certain areas. And how does that get treated? And I suspect that's probably why C-shapes isn't regularly revisited. It cuts off at 2019, I think, was when the paper might have been published in like 2020, 2021, announcing the data set, and their analysis of borders ran through 2019. But yeah, this stuff will absolutely play a role in how open historical map and others try to capture those change states. And I think just the way modern warfare works too, I think those things can get kind of messy pretty fast. Like we may have to come up with new methods for trying to classify and quantify those as warfare sort of changes, or we deal with more types of proxy wars or things like that.
Yeah, it's going to be a tricky subject. We can already see it now obviously with the Ukraine war. We can see it with other conflicts. If you go to China and look at Google Earth or Google Maps, sorry, the boundary is representative of how you perceive it in China. Go to India, the boundary is different because it's from your perspective, wherever you're coming from. There's no agreement there really on where the boundary actually lies. I'm sort of preempting this a little bit because I think natural Earth is your next one on the list. Is that correct?
Yeah. Natural Earth. This is a great segue because natural Earth is number 6. And that type of perspective stuff is one of the things that I love about natural Earth. They have a built-in disputed territories data set, but they also have all these POV, point of view data sets as well. So I can load in the data for a country and say, this is what the world looks like based on this country's point of view. So natural Earth, if anyone's not familiar with it, is a collection of spatial data representing physical and natural features in countries. It's all the building blocks that you would need to make a typical map, things like borders, hillshades, cities, and populated places, like all the population attributes associated with those cities, rivers, lakes. And it's built in a way that all of those line up beautifully. So you don't have to waste a lot of time wrestling with trying to get this random river file that you found to line up with the country border. And these data exist at common scales that you'd be mapping at. So some for like a global scale, some for like a country view, some in between. But there's all these building blocks that you have available that you can just drag these in, stack them up, and get a cartographic product. The genesis of this was actually, I believe, at the Washington Post. Their cartography team, if you will, or their infographics team was trying to build this data set. And I think what was happening was a lot of newsrooms were trying to build this data set because when you're on a tight turnaround, you need to have things that you can work with quickly that mesh together well. So that you're not spending a lot of time fussing with things like data alignment and gaps and slivers in your borders. And then I think the realization was there's also lots of newsrooms that need this. And so eventually the project got open sourced. And now there's a really awesome community that's, I think a lot of them are tied in through Nasus that maintains it and updates it. And it's just one of those great crowdsourced open source products that we have today. The licensing is pretty permissive on it. So any newsroom anywhere can pick it up. And they've kind of set this standard of like, we want you to be able to use this no matter what country you're into. Like if you're an educator, you can use these building blocks to build things. If you're a journalist reporting, like it is kind of a cartographic project that transcends borders, if you will, in a sort of symbolic way. Yeah, kind of a spatial for all thing. And I've used it extensively for maps since probably 2016. It was back when I was doing production cartography for like books and academic publications, and it was just always my go-to, and it's very much stayed that for a lot of things. And like I mentioned earlier, it's a core component within Geo Layers 3. When you're loading in borders and things from their tools, it's pre-populating them from natural earth.
It's worth mentioning here that some of the raster products there are incredible. So the shaded relief maps, like they're beautiful. They're absolutely gorgeous to look at.
And if you're familiar with Tom Patterson, it should come as no surprise to you that Tom is the one that's behind those. I don't know if the version 6 is up there yet, but if you go to Tom's website, it's called shadedrelief.com.net. I can't remember, but he has some version 6 samples in there, and they have been generating the hill shades using Edward. Are you familiar with Edward?
No.
Oh, man. Okay. I should have put Edward on my list. But Edward, it's a Mac app that I think it uses like some machine learning algorithms under the surface. It's been a long time since I watched the NASIS talks when it was introduced, but I love using it. It just makes it really simple to get these beautiful Swiss style hill shades. Like if you're familiar with Eduard Imhoff, I believe that's who the software is named after, like the Swiss cartographer who did the really beautiful terrains. And you can just apply those same techniques with just a bunch of sliders and buttons that make it really easy to bring in more detail or generalize out your terrain and export it out. So anyway, they generated a whole new set of hill shades using Edward, and it's kind of this thing that's been building a solid user base over the past couple of years. And I love that it's a one-time purchase app. You pay $100 in the App Store on your Mac, and you get all the updates, you get all the features, and you're just done with it. You don't have to be caught in the subscription spiral. Yeah, so Edward's great. I guess that's the extra bonus one we'll slip in there next to number 6.
Oh my God, I'm just realizing the amount of work I'm going to have to put in to find all these awesome links that you've been sharing with us. I really appreciate it. Okay, that was number 6. What is number 5?
Number 5 is MapTiler. Have you heard of MapTiler?
I have heard of MapTiler, yeah.
I had not heard of MapTiler until I started my current job. Or if I had forgotten about it. But you can best think of MapTiler as maybe a competitor to what Mapbox used to be. Mapbox, does a lot of navigation stuff now, but back when they were very into the web mapping infrastructure world, MapTiler is what that is now. For starters, they have these beautiful base maps. I love the design of their base maps that they have, but then they have all these tools that are built for developers to build web maps. And one of the things that I stumbled across is this thing called MapTiler Engine that is just kind of this sole single-use application that I guess it's a problem that existed for me early on in my career when I was starting to dive into the web mapping world of how do you get these like vector files up into these web maps and cloud environments like Mapbox. And the first time I had to like upload a geotiff, it kind of took me a while to figure it out because it was like, okay, you got to take your geotiff and hit this API point to get your token. And then you have to take that token and use that to send your geotiff back to this other cloud bucket. And then it processes it there. Oh, and like, here's this big JSON file you have to build that's like your recipe for how you want your geotiff processed. And it's like, I don't know. I just need to get the geotiff onto there. It's an RGB geotiff. Like, this is very simple. And I eventually figured it out. But MapTiler Engine has this really amazing feature where you can just launch this application on your desktop and you just drag the geotiff in there or the vector file in there. And it can be a satellite image or it can be an old map, and it will tile it. It turns it into the MB tiles or the XYZ tiles, whatever it is. And then it just pushes it to your cloud account. And there it is, available for you to use in your suite of mapping tools. And I just thought that was so delightful because learning how to do that in Mapbox early on was such a pain. And if your data is not georeferenced, like if you have a map that you need to georeference, I thought their georeferencing interface was just delightful. It was very user-friendly. Don't get me wrong, I love QGIS and I love like the hardcore way of georeferencing there. But MapTiler also found a way to make georeferencing a little bit easier. And that's why I love MapTiler. And I use it a lot now with where we're at now.
Just out of curiosity, those tiles that you're talking about, are they created locally on your machine or is it done on the cloud?
You can do either. So if you have a MapTiler subscription for like $25 a month, you can have a little bit of storage, like 10 tile sets or something, and you can push those to your MapTiler cloud account, or you can write them to a local format like MB tiles or an XYZ tile directory, or actually as a geo package. They have a geo package spec that like tiles them within the geo package. So then you can just drag those over into QGIS. So you do have to pay. This MapTiler engine is a desktop subscription. It's a little more expensive. It is like $200 a year or something, but it is nice if you are not a spatial person. And that was sort of how we came across it, because again, I work now with non-spatial people who are trying to work with old maps. And this was a really great tool that they were using to get access to that georeferencing capability without having to dive completely into everything that is the QGIS interface and all the nuts and bolts of that. So yeah, you can do either. You can push it to the cloud, you can take it local, and then you can convert it back to the cloud if you want to do something with it in QGIS. Yeah, you have lots of options with it.
MapTiler, they're also the ones behind EPSG.io. Have you heard of that?
Yes. I use that a lot also. Not as much currently, but historically I've referenced that a lot. And yeah, they are very much champions of a lot of the open source web mapping tools like that. I believe it was when Mapbox changed their licensing back in like 2020 or something. They shifted from an open license to a proprietary one. MapTiler took that, I can't remember if it's called WebGL, or Mapbox had it as GLJS. I can't remember what the open version of it is, but essentially MapTiler forked that and maintained the open version of that to kind of carry on that open source web mapping torch that Mapbox had committed to, and then they pivoted to the navigation space. They are very much behind a lot of those projects, and if they aren't the full maintainers, they're committing to these other things we're familiar with. But yeah, EPSG.io is a big one, and one that I come back to over and over again, and I suspect many people do too.
Yeah, I've used it a bunch, and I'm going to continue using it because it's just fantastic. It's just a really clean, easy approach to it.
It is. I've found that a lot of the stuff they design is the UX on it is just very good. So cheers to MapTiler.
Yeah, and they do support a lot of open source initiatives. They're really good citizens of the open source community. So that was number 5.
Number 4 is not MapTiler, but Mapshaper. You ever heard of Mapshaper?
Yeah, I have heard of it. I've never used it.
Yeah, so I hadn't either. It was one of those things. I've never been to a NASIS conference, but for years I have lurked on the talks because I just think there's so many fascinating cartographic, especially on the technical side of things, that people in our community do that I'm just in awe of. And so I would lurk on the NASIS Slack channel and watch for when the YouTube talks were coming out and watch them. So that was the first place I heard about Mapshaper and kind of became familiar with it, but I didn't really have an application for it until now. As I mentioned, a big part of what I do right now is data engineering to convert our spatial data into animation assets. So instead of converting, I don't know, a shapefile into GeoParquet, I now convert it into SVGs. And before, what I would have had to have done was like opened QGIS and loaded the GeoJSON or whatever, and then styled it, and then set up a canvas or a print layout to whatever dimensions I wanted, and then export it as an SVG. And that would be how I get to what I needed there. With Mapshaper, it was built again by, I believe, a newsroom cartographer at the New York Times, because they had similar things where you're trying to take these assets into web formats that aren't necessarily slippy maps. They're like these interactive, like embedded web page graphics, or you're trying to work with them. And so we built this like quick set of just command line tools that you could do things like reduce the number of vertices you could generalize a polygon or a line very easily, or you could convert between formats. So there's some like duplicate stuff between what you would do with GDAL and what you would do with Mapshaper. But the thing that I solely use it for is I can open it, I can load in my file, and then I can just say, output it as an SVG on this canvas. And I just have that set up as a repeat script that I can just change the input file in. I can change the output size, and I'm just to an SVG that much quicker compared to what I would have had to have done to load that all into QGIS. And then I can tweak it that way. So that is my main use for it. They have some other useful options where, like we did a short form video on submarine cables, for example. So the GeoJSON I had the cables broken down by year, and Mapshaper just had like this nice little flag that you could say in the command line tool. You could say like, I don't remember what the flag is, but basically you could say split it by this column in the data set. And so I would get an SVG for every year. So it would give me all the 1800 cables in one SVG, all the 1813 in another SVG, all the 1920s in another. And it was just one command, that lightning fast, and it had all the styling I applied. So it's just great for, again, that repetitive production pipeline style stuff of like, I need to do this over and over again. There's a faster way to do it than manually doing it in QGIS all the time, but it's not quite what GDAL or OGR were built for doing with vector data, per se.
Just looking at Mapshaper right now. So for the people listening, mapshaper.org. And it is really interesting to see a command line interface in a web app.
Yeah. I run it locally, but you can do a ton with it on the web version. Like, yeah, they have a terminal you can open. Some of it is like they just have checkboxes and drop down things for common features. And then there's like a little box that you can add your flags into. So I've sent our animators to this site. They're like, hey, I just need to convert this really quick. How do you do it? It's not anything like crazy complex. And so I've taught them how to go to Mapshaper and use the web interface and stuff, which is just really cool to have that accessible to them.
That's really interesting. I had no clue that you could download that was a desktop app.
Yeah. It just runs as just like you would in the command line. I think there is a GUI you can launch too, but I just open it and you just run Mapshaper in the same way you would run GDAL in the terminal. And you just pass it all your flags for your input and your output and so forth.
This is cool. I'm learning a ton.
Once you teach Claude how to use all your command line tools, then Claude runs Mapshaper for you. So,
interesting you mentioned Claude. Why was that? Why did you mention Claude?
Because my number 3 is actually another tool that Claude uses a lot, and that is GDAL. That is like my daily driver now. But it has to be the new version. I love the new syntax that they released. I don't know if it was GDAL 3.9 or 3.10. I'm running 3.12 now, but it restructured it to where the commands are now more standardized and they have this pipeline feature. But I am very much in love with command line tools like Mapshaper and GDAL because I've just found that type of interface is well suited for something like Claude Code without having to have an MCP wrapper. Because it sort of is already in computer language. It kind of has like that computer human language interface already. So I've watched it use it. I'll say like, hey, here's this GDAL pipeline that I run. I'll say, here's an example. I take this Gebco data set and I clip it to a bounding box. So it'll be like GDAL raster pipeline, input the file, input the Gebco. Clip is the next command in the pipeline. So you can stack all these commands together in a single GDAL command and clip it to this. And then I want you to rescale it, like stretch the values so they're at the full 16-bit range, and then output that as a PNG that's like an 8K frame. And here's my whole process. And so I taught Claude how to do that. I'll tell it to now, hey, I just need it for this bounding box. And it goes and runs like it knows how to run that process now. And because it's a command line tool, if it gets stuck, all it has to do is run the GDAL-help, and it gets the documentation right there. And then if that's not enough, it sees the URL at the bottom that says like, hey, here's the latest GDAL docs. And so it can follow that same chain that I'm already following when I'm using the command line tool, but it can just do it much faster. It can hit that web page faster than I can. It can context switch faster than I can. I'm terrible at remembering the syntax, so I have everything like saved as like all these pre-configured bash scripts. And so it's just been really fun. Yeah, I think that these like Unix style modularized command line tools are just really well suited for LLMs. And I know that MCP has like a lot of utility for plugging into these interfaces, but like QGIS was built for humans. It wasn't built for computers to interface with it easily. I know there's an MCP. I haven't tried it, but I love having Claude use GDAL for me and teaching it all my secrets.
When you say teach it, are you building skills in Claude that understand how to do these things?
Yeah, I have. I actually use a layer of infrastructure on top of Claude Code that's called PAI. It's like personal AI infrastructure that was built by Daniel Miessler. And effectively, all it is just a persistent memory structure that integrates with Claude Code. So it remembers what projects I'm working on. It has a pretty robust like skills library built into it for, it calls it an algorithm, but it's just a series of repeatable steps to go through things. Like, hey, every time that I give you a problem, and if it's like, if you perceive that it's going to be somewhat complex, you're going to iterate through this quote unquote algorithm of like research, observe, really just a good engineering process, a good product design process. And then it will figure out a game plan. It'll make a game plan and then execute it. And then when it's done, it looks at like, okay, what worked, what didn't, what do I need to write back into my system memory to learn from this? And it kind of improves over time. So if I tell it, here's this thing that I'm doing a lot, I'm going to give you a bounding box and we're going to pull a whole bunch of assets. That's going to be height maps. I'm saying height maps because we call them with the animators, but DEMs for these areas. From here's all the data sources I use. Here's like, I like using Sentinel-2 for imagery, like all this stuff. I can just kind of teach it that. So yeah, effectively that has turned into kind of a imagery skill or a data engineering skill where I've just taught it these specific things and it just kind of figures out which one to use without me having to kind of invoke it too hard. It looks at what it knows and goes from there. There's some bugs in it, but I can iterate with it pretty good. And over time, those really repetitive things, it does get quite good at. Again, I can just give it a bounding box and say, hey, we need to run this process. Here's the folder I need you to put it in. And it just lets me work on a few other things and not have to worry about that.
I'm using Claude Code more and more I'm reluctant to leave that interface. I'm looking to connect things to that interface so I can combine it with the rest of the stuff that I'm doing, so I can build my workflows and just staying, instead of context switching all the time, going out and doing something over here and over here and over here and bringing the result back to Claude Code. More and more, I just want to be in there.
Yeah, PAI is really great for that. It has some really robust like research skills built into it and stuff to where you can really like, it is much more kind of a all-in-one personal assistant. I did run it like purely in just the terminal app. And now I use it in Visual Studio Code a lot more in a terminal there, because then I have that workspace up there to view the markdown documents. I have my directory up there. I'm not having to switch over to Finder and stuff. So that's been an upgrade I've made kind of in the last week. That's been really nice. Yeah, I totally relate to that of I'm just in Claude Code more and more and more and not wanting to leave it.
I've also just recently moved to Visual, what is it? Studio Code, Visual Code?
Yeah, VS Code, Visual Studio Code.
VS Code. Yeah, and absolutely love it. And one of the things I really love about it is I can have Claude Code working on something, have a couple of different terminals open while it's doing its thing over there, open up another terminal and get Codex to work on something. Great.
It's slick. Yeah, I love it. I think more people should definitely use it.
Okay, so that was number 3. It's getting more and more interesting, I have to say.
Well, good.
What is number 2?
Well, it'll deliver on the promise of the YouTube title. So my 10 things get progressively more interesting. So number 2, so I talked about that MCP plugin for QGIS, and I know that that's gotten some love and it probably deserves it. I have not installed it or tried it yet because I figured out that Claude can use Grass GIS. I don't know if you ever heard of Grass, but like flashback to the 90s.
Yeah.
If you remember when you launch Grass, it gives you a GUI, but it also gives you a terminal. And I was like, hold on, if Claude can use GDAL, I bet Claude can use Grass. And I haven't like used it extensively, but there have been a couple of projects I wanted to do. Like there's this local stream that runs for a couple 100 miles through here that I've like wanted to do a hydrology analysis of for a while. And I was like, this would be a good test run. Like, hey, Claude, here's like this directory of like 28 gigabytes of 1 meter DEMs from the USGS. Like, go figure it out. Like, I want you to run this hydrology analysis. And it was working. Like, it was sweet. It just plowed through it and I could watch it reason through and like try different tools. And it was using that command line help interface and it figured out how to use it in headless mode. So it didn't have to launch the GUI. And Grass has like a really robust tool library that's like really well scientifically documented. And so it just felt like a tool that was really well suited for a machine to use. And when I use it with QGIS, I just say, hey, here's this data set that I'm using. Here's like these color palettes that I use regularly. Create a QML file for me to create these different maps, and I can just load those in, and it'll create this way for me to style them without having to do the MCP. So maybe I could get some mileage out of the MCP. But yeah, GrassGIS with Claude is kind of the way to go. And if you just launch Grass occasionally and you see the cool like ASCII art and the writing in the terminal that spelled grass, like there's just something really satisfying with that. I don't know if that's because we're all using LLMs in the terminal now and we're all back into terminal art, but yeah, I would not be mad if Grass made a comeback.
Yeah, I've heard the same thing that you just said there time and time again. There's some amazing tools backed by a lot of amazing scientific research. It's incredibly powerful. I have just never personally got past the interface. I just never spent the time to get it. And then when those tools became integrated into QGIS, I thought, great, now I don't need to bother. Now I can just, again, learn how to do this one thing as opposed to splitting my time between two different tool sets. But I think the future for me is going to be Claude Code, the interface, and using that to connect to GDAL, to connect to Grass, to connect to QGIS.
It's slick. So far, it's worked great. I'm loving it. And I know that there's a lot of people talk about like, what will the future of WebGIS look like? I'm just finding more and more that I think the infrastructure is going to matter more. Like I used to get really frustrated that I didn't fully understand the Stack API or like it felt clunky to use. Like I understood in principle what it was doing and I could kind of use it, but it still just never felt fast to be like, I have this bounding box. I just want to see all the scenes and I want to see them in under 30 seconds. Like that was still not a thing for me, even with Stack API. But then once I started having Claude do everything, it was like, hey, Claude, here's this S3 bucket that has the images in it. And let's set up a skill where you know how to pull those and like learn the stack spec. And the stack spec is really well suited for Claude to understand it. And I understand it in principle, but I don't have to write the Python code to access it anymore. And I love that. And I think that type of infrastructure thing is going to become more important than it is like having chatbots inside of QGIS or inside of ArcGIS Pro to just click buttons for us.
Yeah. I heard Sam Altman say recently, like within the last week, he says a lot of things, last couple of weeks, that every company is becoming an API company. And people like you and me, we're working more and more in these through LLMs. And the way they want to talk to other things is machine to machine through APIs, MCPs, command line. And then, yeah, it's interesting. What would you say to people who say, oh, how do you know it's correct? You're just assuming Claude Code gets this right. What's going to happen to our profession if Claude Code just does all this and makes all the decisions?
I can do more with it. I have all these problems that I've wanted to work on for a long time, and they may not be super high stakes, but I've wanted to like get movement on them and test them out and like try these different projects. And so far it's worked. It's given me access to it. If you're concerned about sort of the underlying methodology, there's still a lot of value in you understanding what the analysis is because you can instruct it. You can say like, hey, I've done this before. Here's some gotchas to work out for. Like I told it when I had to do my hydrology thing, I was like, hey, let's make sure that we're not doing this in like WGS 84 or like I want this in a local UTM and figure out how to make that work. You can kind of iterate with it at the beginning of those. You can say, I want to do this hydrology project. Interview me and ask me all the questions that you need until you're like 95% sure about what to do. And you can have like this back and forth. And in a lot of ways, it's like what software engineers have done forever with rubber ducking. You're working through the problem, talking to some inanimate thing on your desk or on your computer now. But now you're getting a feedback loop. And now you can execute the plan and you can say, okay, I feel good about that plan. And then a lot of times I'll say, write me a methodology report to say, here's what it did. The first couple times I'll run it, I'll say, I want all your intermediate files in this directory on my desktop so I can go in and review those and just make sure I feel good about those. I might spin up a second instance of Claude that wasn't working on the project and point it at that and say like, hey, go critique this. What do you think? Like, does this follow good hydrology practice or doesn't it? And those things can be time consuming, but overall, like there are ways that you can still keep yourself in the loop. But now like that process of like get a height map and clip it and make it an 8K, like that thing that I'm already doing over and over again, I know when that output is right and when it's not. And so far, it's never not been right because that's, again, a very repeatable pipeline of like, I just need you to go fetch satellite imagery and process it this way, or go fetch a DEM and process it this way. That's very easy to get comfortable with in that regard.
Like I've said time and time again on this podcast and also during the episode here, I love using these tools. I really do. I feel like they're amplifying what I can do as opposed to replacing me. That being said, I'm not championing the idea of just stop thinking and let them take over at all. I think people need to decide, like, what is the medium and what is the message? What is the goal? Because if the goal is to get this thing done so you can deliver it to someone else, then you've got to decide which one is more important to you. Like, is it the process? Are you more invested in the process? Do you want to be part of that? Or is this just something that needs to happen so you can move on and do something else? I've also said this a bunch of times, but it's worth repeating. Just like you're saying, you can use these tools to help critique it. Like, what went wrong there? What went right there? Why did you do that? And okay, well, what is that thing there? And if you weren't going to go and read the entire documentation, like, so you're probably better off talking to the LLM and asking, like, well, what is that thing? How does that work? Why is it like that? And it's going to get it wrong sometimes. But if you weren't going to read the documentation, well, it's probably way better than nothing.
And I think too, you can prime it. Like you can do those, you can do like a heavier pre-planning session. Like there's so many good research tools built in as agents in these now that you could prime it and say, hey, I saw this blog post on how to generate REMs, the pretty river maps or the height above drainage, and say, I want to make one of these. Like, can you go out and just research this process? And like, it'll just start chasing backlinks through the blogs and it'll land on a YouTube video and it'll then go check the academic paper. It's like all the stuff that you would have done. And then it's going to summarize it. And you can still go chase some of those things that you still feel relevant in until you feel good about the plan. It's making more information accessible to me. It's allowing me to take my spatial thinking and apply it to problems that were inaccessible before. So for example, like where I'm at here is a very rural part of the country. And the newsrooms out here don't have like a lot of capability for different cartographic products or satellite images or things like that. So like Nebraska, near where I live, just had their largest fire in history at like 800,000 acres burned. And I didn't see a single news headline running a satellite image of the burn scar or like stuff that you would see for like other wildfires in bigger, higher populated areas. Like there's always maps or satellite images of stuff. It's just not there. What I've been experimenting with is like, can I set up enough pipelines that I can give basic data journalism access to these types of communities? Like no one's interested in pulling the parcel data for a town of 5,000 people and doing some sort of analysis on the housing market or whatever, like they might with LA, but that town could still benefit from that. That is now more economically viable because I can do it faster. I can hand it off to an agent to do it. I can still supervise it, but there's plenty of benefit there.
Absolutely. Okay. What is your favorite tool? What is number one?
My number one favorite tool, we have to go back to Visual Studio Code. So when I was doing data engineering on these FEMA projects, a lot of the intermediate test files that I would write would just be GeoJSONs to say like, hey, we just tested this one piece of it. I just need the code output and I just want to like make sure that the data looks right. So all the time I would have to like drop it back into a web map or like go to the Kepler GL demo on the web or QGIS open and just drop it in there. And I found out that there's this extension in Visual Studio Code called Geodata Viewer. And it literally has one purpose, and that is just to be able to click on a file in Visual Studio Code, and it will open a Kepler GL little instance as a window inside of VS Code. It looks like, I don't know if very many people use Foursquare Studio, but it just looks like the Foursquare Studio interface, where you can do a little bit of styling, you can click in it and view the attributes a little bit, but then you can also export all your styling stuff like as a Kepler GL GeoJSON like settings, so that if you ever port it over to an actual instance, you can save all those settings and use it that way. But that's literally what I do is I just write the GeoJSON to the working directory I'm in VS Code, or the shapefile or whatever, or the topo JSON, and I just click on it and it opens the web map and I can see, does this data position where it's supposed to? Like, did we get the coordinates? Like, did the coordinate system transformation work? Do the attributes look right? And that's what I love. If you haven't seen a trend in here, I love like these one use kind of random tools, or like I have specific things that I use for one use. And this was one of my favorites that I discovered in the last 3 years and just use it. And it was a minor pain point for me to have to click over into a different window, but I don't know, I just found it delightful and I use it a lot and it's one of my favorite. And if you use VS Code and you're using data, you should definitely get Geodata Viewer in your VS Code extensions.
That would be really interesting for, pulling data out of PDFs and saying, well, where does this data land in a quick check, like a quick sense check. If you had a bunch of PDFs where you wanted the LLM to run through and say, rip out all these coordinates, transform them into this, drop them here as a GeoJSON file, and now without leaving the environment, you can quickly check. I think that's really cool.
And I haven't had a chance to do that, but that is the exact type of thing that I think you'd be able to do a quick check with. Yeah, so if you try it, let me know how it goes because I'm curious.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to install that. I don't know what to say, Ryan. You're brilliant. I've really enjoyed this. I've learned a lot. There was a bunch of these tools here I didn't know existed. And if I had heard of them, I had no idea how to use them. So I really, really appreciate you coming on and talking us through this. And I hope before you leave that you'll promise to come back on again at some stage because
Absolutely.
That would be good too.
Yeah, I'm happy to be back on. And I'm happy that my chaos can have some utility to someone. So hopefully other folks found this useful as well.
That's been awesome. Thank you very much for your time. Really, really appreciate it.
We'll see you.